All right, as we are continuing to look at the Greek culture and the influence on Western civilization, you had some questions to do for today on page 70. So let's look at those. Page 70. If you're at home and haven't done them, either stop your ears. No, go do them right now. Number 1. The name given to the new culture that emerged in the Near East that mixed Greek culture with the cultures of the East. What do you have, Matthew?
The name given to the Hellenistic.
Right, Hellenistic. Did I have you do these in complete sentences?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just call on you to read it then. Thank you, Matthew, for not putting us through that same wording that I had just given you. That was a smart thing to do. Hellenistic is the term. All right, any questions? Number 2, John, read that for us.
Aristotle is the philosopher that had the thinking called syllogism.
Right, the 3-step logical process that they call the syllogism. Aristotle. Any question? Number 3, Griff.
Hippocrates is the man known as the father of medicine.
Correct. Any question? Number 4, Noah.
Thucydides was the more objective historian.
Okay, that's close. Thucydides. It's a hard name to say. Thucydides. Can you imagine his mother calling him in for supper? I'm sure she stuttered many times. All right, number 4. That was number 4. Number 5, Stephen.
The 3 styles of Greek architecture are archaic, classical, and Hellenistic.
No, that would not be the 3 styles of architecture. What do you have, Zach?
Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian.
Correct. 3 points on that one. 1 for Doric, 1 for Ionic, and 1 for Corinthian. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, before Mrs. Mahoney's art room was remodeled, she used to have those 3 columns on her wall. And so when we talked about this in world history, we'd take a field trip across the hall to see the columns. But don't do it anymore, so no field trip, sorry. All right, put the number that you missed up at the top and circle it. Give it to me, and I will record your grades. Now let's get back to talking specifically about the different aspects of Greek culture or Hellenism. These are the contributions that are made to the areas of science, medicine, and mathematics. First of all, Pythagoras. How many of you have heard of Pythagoras, or the Pythagorean theorem? Okay, most of you looks like, all right. He lived prior to the Golden Age. And he said the universe can be explained in mathematical terms. That was quite good insight. That perspective will be used later on by those that brought Western Europe to a scientific method. Men like Kepler, who examined the universe from a mathematical perspective. He also developed what's called the Pythagorean theorem in geometry. Can anybody tell me what the Pythagorean theorem is? No, you haven't had geometry yet, but have you learned about the sides of a triangle? Well, the theorem goes like this. If you assign A, B, and C to the different sides of the triangle, A and B being the 2 right sides of a triangle, that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So if you know any 2 of the sides, you can fill in what is the 3rd side. Next we have Hippocrates, who's considered the father of medicine. His contribution is stating that every disease has a natural cause. So he rejected magic and superstition as causes of disease and recommended rest and a proper diet. So that might be something you'd hear today from a doctor, right? He also wrote manuals and authored what's called the Hippocratic Oath. Doesn't mean you're a hypocrite. It's Hippocrates, Hippocratic Oath. And here's a page that I copied that talks about medicine. This particular box is talking about Asclepius, who, according to legend, was the son of Apollo, and it shows him with a snake. And so he had supposedly was the one who gave medicine to humans. That's why on the symbol of a medical doctor, there's a snake. It comes from that. And this talks about going to the temple to be cured, and sleeping for a night in the temple of the god Asclepius. They would be healed while they slept, and so on. Oh, here's something interesting. People who were cured left offerings, which often was a model of the part of the body that had been cured. When we were in Greece, we were in a museum, and they had all these body parts, not real ones, but like plaster or Paris or cement body parts, and those are the ones that people had left as an offering for what had been healed from them. Here's some surgical instruments that were used. Here's the Hippocratic Oath. So we can look at this together. I swear by Apollo, the healer, Asclepius, Hygiena, where we get our word hygiene, Panacea, and I take to witness all the gods, all the goddesses, etc., keep my ability. During my parents, those who taught me this art, you can glance down through what it says here. I will prescribe regimens for the good of my patients according to my ability and my judgment, never do harm to anyone as part of the oath. I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I'm asked. So that eliminates what? That a lot of people want today.
Marijuana.
What?
Marijuana.
No, that wouldn't be a lethal drug. Well,
Heroin.
I guess it could. It's talking about giving a drug that will cause death.
Heroin.
So that, no, that would be talking about assisted suicide. In some states in the United States, that's legal
Legal.
for a physician to help somebody commit suicide. The Hippocratic Oath says I'll never do that. Nor will I advise such a plan. I'll never advise someone to commit suicide. We have some doctors that are doing that today. Similarly, I will not give a woman a pessary to cause an abortion. So the Hippocratic Oath was that they would not give a woman something to cause an abortion. And yet today it's a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar industry, and in which many doctors are involved. I will not cut for stone, even for patients in whom the disease is manifest. We'll leave the operative. In other words, he's saying I won't perform surgery. Leave that to somebody who's a specialist in that. I'll enter only for the good of my patients. Keep myself from intentional ill-doing and all seduction, especially for the pleasures of love with women or with men. Be there for your slaves. So when I'm going to somebody's house because I'm a doctor, I'm not going to take advantage of the situation for relations with women or men. Anything that comes to me, to my knowledge, while I'm exercising with profession, I'll keep secret, never reveal. And if I keep this oath, may I enjoy life in patience, and life and practice my art, respected by all men at all times. But if I swerve from it or violate, may the reverse be my lot. So this is the Hippocratic Oath. I don't think the first part is I recited today, but that is in large part the oath that doctors have taken in the past. I'm not sure if they still do or not. That once was common, and it was expected that the doctors would take the Hippocratic Oath. All right, so that's Hippocrates. He contributed a lot to our culture through the Greeks. The next guy is Euclid. He's the father of geometry. You're going to be reading an article about him for tomorrow and answering some questions, the elements of Euclid. So I'll make sure that you accomplish that. Father of geometry, he founded a school of mathematics in Alexandria and authored the textbook called Elements. Then we come to Archimedes, who is an inventor and a mathematician. He discovered the principle of a lever. Don't know what a lever is, right? Shake your heads. You know what a lever is. Okay, some of you are not shaking. You'll have to ask somebody then. Next is Eratosthenes, who was an astronomer and geographer who determined the circumference of the Earth. He determined the circumference to be 28,800 miles. Does anyone know the true circumference of the Earth? 24,857 miles. So he was only about 4,000 miles off, which is pretty good just using math to determine it. Now I have read, though, that he was lucky more than he was smart, because he made some major miscalculations in a couple different areas, but they balanced each other out, so he came up with a figure that was close. He more importantly, formulated the lines of longitude and latitude. And again, all this strikes at the idea that people have that before Columbus, it was believed that you would fall off the edge of the Earth, that nobody knew it was round. That's patently absurd. These guys are coming up with longitude and latitude and determining the circumference, all that stuff. Obviously, they knew the Earth was round. Everybody did. All right, so that's Eratosthenes. Any question about any of those guys? Let's go to the area of literature. The first kind of literature we want to look at is history. The father of history's name was Herodotus, as you see here. Herodotus gives us a lot of interesting things, but unfortunately he also includes myths and exaggerations, so you can't always trust Herodotus. The more trustworthy historian that you read about in your text is Thucydides. He's more accurate and objective. So if you ever read something and they quote Herodotus, may or may not be true. Thucydides, more likely. All right, any question about the two historians? How many of you have ever heard of Herodotus before? He's more well known for some reason than Thucydides. Anybody ever heard of Thucydides? Probably not. All right, next is the area of drama. Drama was used to educate people in their religious beliefs, moral behavior, and civic pride. So it was educational in its purpose. And there are three types of drama. Comedy, the satyr plays, and tragedy. The comedy plays were mainly satirical, making fun of something in society. They mocked men in power for their vanity and foolishness. Some later wrote comedies about ordinary people. Menander is one who wrote comedies that way. In fact, some of them were like sitcoms that we have today. Situation comedies. Tragedy dealt with big themes of loss of things, loss of love or love itself, pride, the use of power, the unsteady relationships between men and gods. Typically, the main protagonist of a tragedy commits some terrible crime without realizing how foolish and arrogant he has been. Then, as he slowly realizes his error, the world crumbles around him. The three great playwrights of tragedy were Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. The third kind of play were the satyr plays, and those were short plays performed between the acts of a tragedy. And they made fun of the characters in the tragedy. called Satyr because named after the half human, half goat figures that you may have seen pictures. All right. Now the person who established drama, his name was Thespis, around 534 BC, according to tradition. And actors today take their name from him. They're called thespians, from Thespis. As I mentioned before, Sophocles was one of the most noted writers of tragedy. Aristophanes was known as a writer of comedy. This is a picture of the Theater of Dionysius below the Parthenon. I think I showed this picture to you before. So the seats would have come all the way up the grassy hill here. And this would be the stage down here. So you could be sitting quite a ways away, and yet you could hear because of the natural amphitheater that is there, and that they did that over and over again wherever they built theaters. Now, the specifications of putting on a play were that they didn't use special costumes or scenery. So unlike today, when I've directed plays, one of the big headaches is, okay, how are we going to get the scenery? And changing the scenery from one act to another, and all that. Anybody come to see The Princess Bride when we did that? Oh, you missed one of the greatest things we ever did here. But the big headache was that there were 36, I think, scene changes. And of course, figuring out how to have the fire coming out in the fire swamp and the giant rats and falling down the hill, all that stuff was a nightmare. But they didn't deal with that, and they didn't deal with costumes. Costuming is always a big headache for me when I was directing plays. What they did to identify different people was not their costume, but a mask. They would simply wear a mask that would identify the character, and that led to a word that we use today, because someone who wore a mask was behind a mask, and that was called a hypocrite. That means behind the mask. Well, that came then to be used for someone who, in their lives, hid behind a mask. They pretended to be something they're not, so they came to be known as a hypocrite. But originally it meant an actor, someone who wore a mask on stage. The actors in Greek dramas were men only. So if it was a female character, he just wore a mask indicating that he was a female character. There was a chorus of men that commented on the action, and eventually they would dance. And they were located in front of the theater. Well, here's some information about the Great Theater showing you here. This is the one at Ephesus, and this is a little bit closer to the stage area, which you can hear. And here are all the seats you can see. Maybe look at it. Now, this one seated 24,000. Here are some of the masks that were used. And now, as I was saying, there was a chorus of men that would have been in front of the stage that would have lines that they would say together that were comments. They're like their narrators in a way. And then later on, they would do some dancing as well. The dancing took place on the platform there in front of the stage, and that area was called, from the Greek word to dance, called the orchestra. So orchestra wasn't a musical thing then. The orchestra simply meant the area in front of the stage where the people danced, and where the chorus was. So eventually, because later on, much later, we have musical instruments down there, that then comes to be called an orchestra. Actors were held in high esteem and received a small remuneration from the state. So the government paid for them to act because they felt it was in best interest for society that they be taught the lessons be there on the stage. Plays were not for profit, but it's considered an act of worship to the gods to come and watch a play. Okay, next we have excellence in art. We see that in the urns, which are pictured here. On the urns we find scenes of everyday life. We find battles, athletic competition, and activities of their gods. So here's a battle. All kinds of things are pictured on the urns. The Cleveland Museum of Art has an excellent collection of urns with all kinds of different pictures of them. Then there's also, here's some more urns. Look at that first. Does anyone recognize this story? It's from, well, see, first of all, over here, let's see, get in order. This is Achilles. Remember, he's the one whose heel left unprotected would kill him. Let's see. Then the one on top is from the Odyssey. Remember when Odysseus making a voyage past the Sirens. The Sirens were women that were on the rocks, and their singing would draw men to them, and then their ship would crash on the rocks. Well, or not Odysseus, Ulysses, wasn't it? Yeah. Wanted to hear them, but he didn't want his men to, guide the ship on the rocks, so he put wax in all their ears, so they wouldn't hear it, so they would keep rowing, and he had himself tied to the mast, so that when hearing them, he wouldn't be able to force them into doing anything. So that's a picture there. This one is a school scene showing how boys of ancient Greece were taught music and poetry. So we have a boy playing the lyre with his teacher, another standing before his reading teacher, reading to him. Here's a man with a cane. He's called a pedagogue. That was a servant who brought him to school and made sure that he behaved. Pedagogue. We get our word pedagogy today, which refers to education. This is a vase with a scene from a play. So these are actors. All right, next we have sculpture. There are three types of sculpture, three main periods of sculpture, I should say. The first one is the archaic period, in which the sculptures were stiff and expressionless, and I don't really have any like that pictured here. Second was classical period, and they sought to represent the ideal man. And we may find that here, the classical sculptures. They're all very muscular, well built, and that was the ideal man. I'm trying to show that. The third period of sculpture was called Hellenistic. And in this one, the calm self-confidence was replaced by a frenzied emotional tone, losing its simple beauty. So it was more emotional, more frenzied, less perfection. So here we have the archaic period. You can see they're kind of stiff, lifeless. Here's the classical period, where it looks more like they're doing something. There were a lot of busts during that time, head and shoulders. And then the Hellenistic period is down here. Next we come to architecture. Much of the architecture is used in building temples. And the most famous is the Parthenon in Athens. It was started in 447 BC. It featured numerous architectural innovations. It sat on a base which was 70 meters long and 26 meters wide. It was constructed in the Doric style. If you look at the columns, they're Doric. Now, this is something they figured out. If you have a right-angled building, so it comes to a right angle here, you know what that is, a 90-degree angle. Then when you have a right-angled building, and if you build the column the same width all the way up, it will tend to make the building look lopsided. They figured out that if they made the column get thinner as it went up, it actually looked straight. And when you look at it, they look straight. But they're not. I mean, the same all the way up. They actually get thinner. The Apostle Paul passed by here and addressed the Greek idolatry in Acts 17 that we have looked at in Bible class. And then we come to the three orders. By the way, I've used the word column, but technically it's not a column. It's called an order. And the cap is what determines what it's called. This is Doric, so it's rather plain. This is Ionic, which has the curly ends to it there. And then this is called Corinthian, which is more fancy. It has leaves, sometimes or other plants that are there. Those are the three kinds of orders. All right, do you have any questions about the culture that we've looked at today? There's a lot there, I know, a lot of names. So I would suggest that you review them, ask each other questions about these different guys so that you can keep them straight. You will be quizzed over them. You won't have to come up with a name, but you'll need to match them with whatever his accomplishment was. All right, any questions? All right, the rest of the time you can work on the assignment you have for tomorrow. And if you finish that, then you may quiz each other on these different people that we've talked about under Greek culture. Okay, get to it.